Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have one returning good brother and one newcomer into the temple. In the blue corner, we have, making his return after giving me a proxy smack upside the head, good brother Derek. And in the red corner, making his debut in the temple, the other half of the Nomventure, our good brother Kerby Lambert. No Raiden jokes, folks. He's heard them all. Also, no jokes about a certain pink thing. How you two doing today, man?
Doing great. Happy to be here. Honestly, I've heard a lot of Kirby jokes. I actually don't get a lot of Highlander jokes, so actually, feel free to throw them my way, sure.
I don't know. When's the last time you've had haggis?
10 years ago.
It's not that bad. Then again, I've had people tell me that chitlins isn't that bad, and I refuse to eat chitlins again unless I'm getting paid.
So what you're saying is, if I pay for it, you'll put them in your mouth.
You cannot afford that. I'm telling you right now. You cannot.
We can get a GoFundMe going. I don't know, man.
No.
Yeah, we can get the whole community active.
For one, let me put it this way: the smell alone of chitlins, just being around it and smelling it, is enough to get me pissed off. That is how bad it is.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a story there, like something that's happened in the past.
I've had my fair. There's always that one person in the family who thinks that they're a better cook than they are, and this is even worse with some families in soul food. And I've had my fair share of experience, and there's I don't hate all soul food. I just hate chitlins.
It sounds more like you hate a particular family member who thinks that they're a much better cook than they are.
No, because I've had chitlins by other cooks, and no, I still hate it. Although, at family reunions, I've mentioned this elsewhere, but I'm banned from the kitchen because of one time that I messed with the cranberry sauce as revenge for somebody giving me trick candles on my birthday a couple years beforehand. They thought they were eating cranberry sauce, jellied cranberry sauce, and in reality they were eating red beets.
Cool.
Which...
yeah, that's pretty mean.
Yeah, so is using trick candles on me so that when I try and blow the candles out, they light right back up.
So what you're saying is definitely go to your birthday parties, but don't invite you to my Christmas party.
No,
I think that's the message, yeah.
No, I never strike the first shot. It's always when somebody set things up that I give the receipt. But moving past my backstory when it comes to my villain arc, as some would put it, I do have to go by the tradition since this is Kirby's first time here. So Kirby, I'd like you to walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Oh, geez. I honestly was technically my first introduction. Is me being a young teen and playing the old Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines game and going from there. That's technically my first introduction. I wouldn't actually get to play like in person, actually rolling dice with people, telling stories and such, until later on when I would eventually be with some buddies out to sea. We didn't have anything prepared, so we made maps on like I think it was Microsoft Excel or something, and we used command script to roll dice because we didn't even have that. So that was my first go. It was a lot of people arguing over building a spaceship. It was like the old Star Wars 3.5 edition or whatever, or based off that edition, anyways.
There's two based on that edition. Based
I
on
think
the three.
Saga edition.
The better one.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of people. It was like half the party immediately wanted to split off, and we were all new to role playing games, and they just wanted to build a ship and get out of here. And only the other half was interested in, if you could call it a story, whatever story I was trying to drum up as a rookie game master. Um, so good times, yeah.
Yeah, I could certainly get along with that. Now, obviously, the work of Nomventure is no stranger to this temple, but the idea of doing a game that is meant to be an all ages affair, that is meant to have a very low barrier to entry with Nomventure. Um, how did this idea come about?
Well, the MO for the company has always been the same, right?
Hmm.
It's always been about making sure that every single person gets to sit around the gaming table and have fun. We want to make sure that, gaming is inclusive, right? So, when we dropped our first product, which is one that you're very familiar with, Mildred, we were able to achieve that in a really cool way, getting like 12-year-olds all the way to like 80-year-olds to play in the same game, no matter what their interests were, and that was super cool and super awesome. But as kind of the years went by, we started to realize that gaming in general isn't really inclusive of a lot of people, specifically people with like neurodivergences, physical disabilities, and so forth. So we were honing our craft with smaller little games, little card games that you might have seen us publish that are also just really fun for adults who hate their friends. Um, we we started getting experience through that and building up our confidence to say, let's see if we can lower the bar further. So with our latest game, Nomventure, it's actually built off of one of the Emberwind rule sets, and we just converted and wrote in a way that we've been able to take that barrier of entry from 12 all the way down to 5, along with a couple other little accessories here that to get kids at least introduced to the concepts by about 2 or 3.
Hmm. Yeah, and when it comes to what you mentioned, especially about bringing people in, this ties into something that I've talked about in the past, and that is that the teaching tools for getting people into the idea of role playing, because it's nowhere near as daunting as a lot of people think it is, even now. But the way that a lot of people try and teach the concept is woefully outdated. And when I say outdated, I mean a lot of the teaching methods are stuck in the 1970s. That might be a bit harsh, but that's the way I've seen it.
I don't I don't think you're wrong on that, and I mean, I'd happily jump on the bandwagon of not necessarily being as harsh, though I do have some mean words to say about certain products out there. It's more about the fact that like we can always be doing better. Uh, fun should be something that everyone always has access to in some form or another. So yeah,
Yeah, it's it's one of those things where the way role playing was described to me was um cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians or the like, just with rules. Nowadays, the approach that I go with is say take how to host a mystery and add dice rolls. Um, but with a lot of the teaching tools within the games, especially more ubiquitous affairs, it's still operating under the assumption that people are coming in like they have that same historical wargaming background from the 70s, which is not an assumption that should be made, especially when trying to make something for, in theory, everybody.
Absolutely. I think it's in general very it's a skill to be able to teach people games. And I think the wonderful thing about role playing games in general is typically, you don't need to know all the rules like you would with a board game to get started. You can just get started and start, you know, uh, plugging stuff in as you go along. I do think some people kind of get a little wrapped up in making sure that players know every little thing a little too quickly, a little too early.
girls
But you,
lawyers.
you could, yeah, you could
Oh,
definitely
rules
ease
lawyers
players in.
love
Yeah.
dealing with my shit because I keep calling them out. Um, but there's I look at tutorials in a video game. Even no tutorial, or at least the ones that are done properly. Um, none of them really do this whole thing of, oh, you need to know all the rules before you even start your first session. Uh, which is why it's always funny that seems to be the expectation within the tabletop discourse. Like I said, a lot of the thinking is in that same medieval thinking that you may have seen if you've seen the film Moneyball. I'm
Mm.
reminded of those old scouts who were focused more on feels of players rather than the actual numbers. Uh,
Yeah, I think you're right in saying all that. There's definitely like an old guard style approach to games. I think it's shifting gradually, and what we're doing is one of those pieces that are helping with that shift. But
mhm.
there's very much like a learn from like example versus like a learning by doing thing.
Yeah, and
And video games, I think, are doing a lot better where they understand like nobody is going to read the rule book attached to the game. They want to put in the disc, watch all the cool graphics, all the cutscenes, and they really want to learn by actually playing through, right?
mhm.
Learning in motion of what's happening.
Yeah, and when I'm referring to tutorials that do it bad, um, I just did a thing reacting to a very good breakdown of all the game design flaws in Mighty Number 9, which I honestly think more people should study to learn what not to do. But it has you go into this separate menu for all of the tutorial mechanics, and that is instead of organically teaching you, which is a big reason why say the highway stage in Mega Man X keeps getting lauded, because it's a natural teaching tool. Uh, this was also the reason why when Fantasy Strike came onto the scene in terms of its video game debut, I had praised it as being a very good way to teach people how to play 2D fighting games without an overbearing tutorial on the ins and outs, by just focusing on three buttons. Dive Kick did something similar, but it was a bit too simplified in my opinion. So it's a case where you can swing the pendulum too far the other way. And it is funny you bring up that some of this was built on some of the mechanics from Emberwind, because that was one of the first things I noticed, that the card-based approach that you're doing is not far removed from the positive negative card system that was a module part of Emberwind.
Right. That was the Deck of Fate mod, which you can use outside of combat and Emberwind. I could use it for skill checks. I think it really shines with role playing checks, specifically when you're doing, say, fast talk or intimidation.
Yeah.
That's intentional. When we were first drumming this up, we started writing this in 2023. We wanted to do basically a kid-friendly one-shot. So I had to look at what was already going to be available at this convention that we were going to do this one-shot at, and I thought Deck of Fates was a great way to go about that. Since being kid-friendly one-shot, in my opinion at least, it should be more role-playing heavy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
certainly
kids
get
are.
that.
Sorry.
Plus, any kid around that age is probably going to be familiar with some variety of flashcards. And I'm guessing when it comes to a physical version of the cards in this one, have you guys considered doing it in that flashcard size?
We have. There's a lot of things that kind of come into this actually. So, um, one of the things that Kirby didn't say there that's really important is that kids are the number one type of player that will just come up with, and then this happened. So we had to kind of come up with something that isn't just role playing oriented, but could accommodate that level of imagination exploring. It really kind of supported their ability to run around and, do whatever they wanted in that fun, cool way. Uh, and the Deck of Fates specifically, or the Yay Nay check deck system that it's been rebranded to for Nomventure, does a really good job of doing that in that concrete form. When it comes to the size of the card, we're actually using standard poker card sizes for this. There was a lot of discussion within the team about going with a larger card size, and we might be producing specialized versions of that in the future for people who might need a larger version of it. But the main reason that we went with the standard poker size is because another barrier to accessibility for games has always been price. And by offering in that standard card version, not only were we able to keep costs lower, we also make it a lot easier for people to do print and play at home and then put it into like your standard card sleeves and just want to make sure everything was consistent.
Mm-hmm.
That said, we are doing some pretty unique things with some of those cards. Like if you're talking about flashcards, to make Nomventure as accessible as possible to as many audiences, this is our first explicitly accessible game. So we're including modules for professional use to make it so that anyone who may be neurodivergent in whichever way that they might be can still sit around the same gaming table to play with everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
One of those cards that we're including are going to be a set of, in quotes, flashcards. They're standard playing card size, but they're emotion flashcards made specifically for kids who may be autistic or struggle with their ability to express themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the tricks that we're hoping to do, this is one of the stretch goals, anyways, in the Kickstarter that we're hoping to hit, is to produce it not on your standard cardstock and paper cores, but to do it on a new type of material, a semi-transparent PVC type of card material, where we can color code the cards in some pretty fun ways. For example, if you have an angry card, it's red, and then if you have a sad card, it's blue. And because they're semi-transparent, you can stack them on top of each other, at which point that will have them effectively change colors, right? You can mix red and blue together and create purple. You can teach a kid about the fact that they're now feeling a complex new emotion, or perhaps two emotions at the same time, in a way that they couldn't otherwise experience before. Right? Like it's very much about making the abstract concrete, and that's what we're trying to do with all the different assets, including using a card-based system instead of just rolling dice where arbitrary numbers correspond to something.
Yeah. And with that in mind, was this when you guys were designing the look of it? What was it a case where you guys always had planned on using the Nomventure that you've had as kind of your mascot for the longest time as a base, or did that happen midway through?
No, that was always the plan. According to my team, anyways, I scheme a lot, and I've had a lot of these ideas floating around my head for decades that I've been assembling kind of pieces to. Emberwind, our inaugural release, is a part of all that, but so has been every single release since then. There's a really cool principle in psychology, specifically educational psychology, called scaffolding, which is where you want people to kind of develop in whatever way they can, and they scaffold by learning off of one another. And we want to make sure that people have a chance to develop in whichever way that is interesting to them to do so, right? We're just helping you grow to kind of the best version of yourself that you can through the games that you're playing. So we've built some of those through lines without telling people. For example, you can progress through our card games, Snack Attack, then Dungeons and Dinos to Emberwind, and through that specific sequence of games and the little tricks that we use, we actually teach you to read better, even if you had, let's say, dyslexia. Nomventure is one of those particular products that fits within this entire series of games that builds a whole new series of connections in the web so that people can progress in different ways. The dinosaurs are a key component of it because we want to make sure that the kids enjoying all the other products can easily flow into Nomventure and from Nomventure to Emberwind. And if you look very carefully, it's not so much the dinosaurs that are interesting, it's the art style. Nomventure is done in a kid's version of the Emberwind aesthetic, where we've broken down the paint stroke that you see in Emberwind into effectively crayon strokes for Nomventure. Which might imply that there may or may not be something to bridge the two in the near future. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Because that's about as subtle as getting hit with a snowball in the face. Also, it's
Well,
also you
subtle.
scheming. You're a GM. So, do you have any idea how little that narrows it down?
Correct, but this is where I'm going to throw Kerby under the bus and say, blame him. He's the pro GM on the team, not me.
Now Derek has wheels within wheels, just turning and turning. Wouldn't surprise me if he already knew who I was, even though I was a nobody a few years ago.
As far as I'm concerned, I blame both of you, and I'm assuming that you guys are in some part of the studio plotting to take over the world, a la Pinky and the Brain or something.
Well, you know,
Pinky.
well, I don't know. I think I would prefer to be Pinky, but you know, that's our Sunday night is just plotting for stuff like that. Yeah.
And
yeah, then our Narf offs where we try and decide who is Pinky and who isn't.
it's like trying to figure out which of you is Abbott and which of you is Costello, or the bigger question of who's the tank.
That has to be Derek. I think Derek's pretty tanky.
No, you misunderstood the question. Who's the tank? Who is the tank? So why does everyone keep falling for this?
Directed at you, Kerby.
Huh? I had no idea.
That one's directed at you, Kerby.
Haven't you ever heard of Who's on First?
Yeah.
Same principle. Who's the tank? What's the mage? I don't know. Is the priest?
Okay.
Hold on.
No worries.
And we are back.
Yeah, welcome back.
And with now continuing on from that, the primer is pretty light, and it's funny you mentioned board games early because that was definitely the design that I had in the back of my mind. It looked like the design setup that you see for a board game that you see for a board game rule book. Was that one of the design goals to kind of lean into that given the subject matter?
Yeah, man, it's so easy to explain all the things I want to explain since you're always asking the right questions. You really have an eye for design. Um, so it follows suit to its like older brother Emberwind in a lot of different ways. Emberwind took a lot of cues from film and video games because he wanted to widen the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So the like art direction for Emberwind was done in a way where the art itself is good enough to tell its own story that makes you want to actually read the book, which is very different than the typical approach that most TTRPGs go, which is you've got artwork that supports the text. Similarly, if we're trying to make these types of RPGs accessible to kids, we wanted to make it more recognizable to things that they might have experience with and or understand. One of those influences is definitely board games. Another one is like kids' books and so forth. That's even why like the actual big book version of the game that's being kickstarted at the moment, it's not your standard like D&D book size. It's much smaller. It's closer to like a school agenda size, so it's made for like the hands of little kids.
Mm-hmm. Plus, I'd imagine it's going to make it easier to carry about when you're presenting this thing at cons.
Yeah, you also it sounds like you're dooming us to continue on our con warpath more than I would necessarily want to be. But yep,
I'm not doing
that's
it.
definitely
I'm not
true.
doing anything. You're doing that yourself. Just don't blame me. Don't blame me for that.
Well, then you're just accurately foretelling the future.
This is why my friends call me Negrodamus.
What's the also what's the man? I can't remember what's the Facebook report button. Like, I'm in this picture and I don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that more or less fits things. But with that in mind, uh, even though you've written this as a kids RPG, it sounds like this is something that is just as viable as a all ages affair. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I'll say a little bit here and then pass the baton on to Kirby so you can say more. The idea is that we want to create at base a game that people could play at as young an age as 5. But as kids grow older, they start learning more things. They become, the bigger people that they are, both physically, emotionally, and mentally. We wanted to make sure that the game was something that could grow alongside of them. That's one of the reasons why, just like Emberwind, it's built on a simple one-page rule set. That's what that primer is. And as you get better at it and want more out of your game, from texture to wrinkles to really whatever you're looking for, we provide you with the ability to strap on a bunch of different mods to it to change how the game works. Kirby, if you'd like to dive in and say more here, this is, your invitation too.
Say more. Now, yeah, we want a game that can grow with you, right? And that means being able to, I would say, feel out the water with new mods as you go along. We've written up a lot of mods that you can just pick up or drop even mid-session if it's not working for you or your table. But yeah, that primer is very, very simple. It's the simplest version of the rules while still being Nomventure, I think. And from there, if you want things to be more difficult, well, we have mods for that. If you want things to encourage more teamwork among players, well, we have other mods for that as well. It's a big thing for us to basically have taken like Emberwind's DNA, stripped it down, and walked it back up, as opposed to meticulously trying to walk Emberwind back to make it more accessible for children. We're trying to write a game that meets children where they're at, looks at how they're already playing games. Derek brought it up earlier, where a child is constantly telling you what they have going on during play. I know I've had that experience a lot with the kids that are in my life, where they just tell me like, "Yeah, no, I'm magically super fast now. Deal with it." And we have mods for that, to basically meet a player where they're at, how they want to play, because children are always going to play creatively, and why fight that? So another thing that's part that comes from Emberwind's DNA. Well, if you're familiar with Emberwind, there's an option to write down aspects in Emberwind. Basically, you adopt these words from Emberwind, and then that translates to numbers. Well, we kind of stripped that down to just being free form traits. And actually, I think in the latest draft that I sent over to Derek, we circling back to that idea that, like, well, kids are going to tell you how they want to play. We have written a mod where you can start the game with one or no traits and just learn about this character as you go along. A lot of the stuff that we're putting into the big book kind of follows several different pillars, where we have accessibility mods, we have gameplay mods, that sort of thing. And it's meant to add texture, like Derek said, and it's meant to emphasize what you want to be important for the session that you're running, right? Nomventure is catering toward shorter sessions than your typical like Emberwind game, for example, where you're looking at like 30 minutes to maybe 2 hours. And so when you're looking at that, you really want to be able to pick the mods that are going to support your story for that session, right?
Yeah, like I very much say it is definitely an all ages affair, but that doesn't necessarily mean all audiences. Emberwind focuses more on, telling an epic narrative, simulating that fun war gamey feel that people really, really enjoy that come from traditional TTRPGs. The people who like, epic, grand scale, top shelf stuff. Non-venture, on the other hand, is more about telling these small, cute stories. It's really focused more about the storytelling and the role-playing aspects than it is about, let's say, the nitty-gritty numbers of combat. But that doesn't mean that people who are older won't be able to find enjoyment out of this particular game. And one of the mods that Kerby alluded to but didn't talk about is the fact that we really want to include not only good mods for younger kids, but also older kids and even adults who might be trying to learn how to be the best storyteller they can be. One of the mods that we haven't told anybody yet, so you're hearing it here for the first time, is a collaborative mod between us and the Story Engine, which is a tool that's designed to help anybody from an amateur GM to a professional writer to, your 8-year-old come up with compelling plot hooks, storylines, characters, and all of that. And it's being built into Nomventure as a way to teach anybody how to DM better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, since you brought up the idea of not wanting to simplify Emberwind back into that same all ages affair, let me ask something that kind of flips that on its head. And this is you don't have to. This isn't something that has to be done obviously for this campaign, but down the road, have you guys considered putting in some sort of advice if somebody wanted to bring the kind of characters that they've built with Nomventure as they get older and get more experience into something like Emberwind?
Right. I think I'll start off and maybe hand off to Derek. But from my point of view, Derek talked about scaffolding and preparing you along the way with Snack Attack to Dungeons Dinos to Emberwind, etc. That's always been my goal going into Nomventure is writing these mods in such a way that we're not just teaching you to be a better like GM, we're teaching you to be a better player and to also be able to take this knowledge that you're learning from Nomventure when you eventually graduate to Emberwind or another role-playing game, right? So part of that is like we do have mods that are kind of like already in parallel with Emberwind, and the idea here, at least from my point of view, is you can get to Emberwind, take a look back at all the things you've done while you're reading through the Emberwind book, and be like, oh, well, that's kind of like this, that's kind of like that. I think I can get a handle on this.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. For me, it's
we've always really wanted.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well,
one of us has to go ahead. We've got a polite standoff now.
Yeah, I don't. Is it possible to have a Mexican standoff when none of us are Mexican?
Well, I guess I can keep Canadian, going as the other alternative.
No Mexican.
I'll state that as I mentioned before, the teaching tools for getting people into role playing are inadequate for the most part, and I'd like to go on with that. And this is something I brought up when I addressed the issue of the high level drop off problem that, say, D&D has had, because I think a lot of people just say, "Oh, it's too easy at high levels," and then end it there. When that doesn't really, might be the case, but that doesn't really help solve the problem. And I'd said that part of the problem was when you have this hyper focus on the new player experience, turning that new player into something more seasoned, there's not really a pipeline for them to go with. Like, you look in professional sports, you've got a pipeline from someone going from amateur to pro to the big leagues. But there isn't really anything like that in a lot of TTRPG guidance.
I mean, there is, but it's not obvious. The way that I'd like to phrase it is there are lots of skills that are transferable from one game to another. Like a very simple example from video games is to move around in one game versus another game, you usually use WASD, right? That's transferable. You don't need to be taught that every single time. And as a game designer, you'd kind of be dumb if you decided arbitrarily to make RDFG your WASD for some reason, right? So there definitely is that type of transferability, provided that you roll with it, right? And I say that as a humongous pun, but also intentionally here, right? Like the rolling of dice is very transferable from one tabletop to another. The main problem that happens, though, is when games, or more importantly, their parent companies, look at it as a way where they want to keep their player base to only their game. We're not that type of company. While we do appreciate people who pick up our games and stick with it and play forever and all that, we really like our philosophy is just wanting to make gaming in general more accessible to people. Like, we don't want people playing our game so much as we want people playing their game, whatever that might be. If at that moment they're most interested by, the very big, game that involves dragons and dungeons, then cool, right? If that's I don't know, backstabbing their friends in Among Us another day, that's also cool. We just really want to empower people to ultimately play whatever it is that they most enjoy. And to go back to your previous question, I feel like this is where I can reveal kind of my villain arc by explaining all the schemes I've been setting up over all the years. But yes, there definitely is a transfer point because we want to make sure that whoever is playing games, right, they're not just able to move outside of our ecosystem from, let's say, Nomventure straight to something like D&D or Numenera or whatever else. we want them to be able to seamlessly transition within our content too. So I don't know if people have noticed, but longtime fans of our stuff will have probably recognized one very persistent little dog that shows up everywhere. This dog shows up in Snack Attack as Rex. This dog shows up as the Woofle in Dungeons and Dinos. This dog also shows up in Emberwind as the Goodest Boy, a Caped Crusader. There is plans to have that dog along with some other things that we might have already sprinkled through that you can find if you look hard enough that will allow the two games to actually connect to one another. And there are plans for effectively a bridging campaign to allow for kids to directly step in from Nomventure right into the Emberwind universe and then be able to port their characters over.
It's definitely a villain arc. Although I'm not sure about a super villain yet.
Well, most villains don't deploy adorable puppies and specifically try and make, the world a friendlier place. But hey,
Like I
that
said,
seems pretty villainous, at least towards
a villain, but not a super one.
fair.
Then again, some of my forms of villainy would have been things like buying every other seat at a theater that was doing a showing on Valentine's Day so that couples couldn't sit right next to each other.
Some people are just going to sit on the same seat if that happens.
And get yelled at by the usher.
Yep. That's going to be the most disruptive theater ever. That actually is a real villain thing. Like, just straight up minorly inconvenience everybody.
Well, I put a program in a bunch of computers once at one of my old places that just had back in the day that just had the CD tray open every 90 seconds. Nothing malicious, just there to inconvenience people and trigger their OCD. So, I mean, yeah, you can close the CD tray, but you're not you can leave the CD tray open, but you're not going to do that.
Correct. I mean, at some point that might be considered a godsend, like if someone isn't getting enough stim, right? That they've got something to focus on. Like it could become a pretty zen practice. In fact, maybe it's something that you indoctrinate new monks to your monastery with. Just sit here and push this button for the next 10 years.
No, I indoctrinate them with a very sink or swim policy. Just say, okay, there's a free drink at the end. There's a free drink at the end of that bar, but you have to run through it barefoot, and then I tell them afterwards that the ground is lined with D4s.
Oh no. I feel like the correct thing to do is give someone a drink first to up their pain tolerance. But again, that might make me the villain, you the super villain. So,
well, as we learned with Megamind, the difference is presentation. But there's been that. There's the whole thing of if I give people the drink, it's the pain glass, and that's usually a glass of bacon soda. Like, you wanted a drink, you just didn't specify what kind.
I love how non-specified automatically translates to the worst.
Haven't you ever heard the expression "the devil's in the details"?
I have, though I feel like that's treading into some dangerous territory of straight up rules lawyering life.
Oh, I'm never gonna be that kind of rules lawyer. In fact, I've been the type who trolls rules lawyers. I mean, at one of my old tables, I had a rules lawyer who asked if he could borrow my copy of the player's handbook, I gave him a copy of the player's handbook. I didn't tell him that copy was mirror written. So there's there's that.
That's wonderful. You really are a villain. I should never introduce my best friend to you, who really, compared to what you're doing, was like baby level. But like, I still have a D20 he had gifted me for the first time I ever DM'd, where the 20 face was replaced by a second one. And I could not figure out for the life of me why all my NPCs were dying for the first 6 months I was running that campaign until I really took a closer look at that die.
Oh, that is beautiful.
It's great.
Yeah,
Oh.
Evan, if you're listening to this, I hate you and I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, given my antics, I can't pass judgment. But with that in mind, um, what would you guys be shooting for as far as a release window? I know it says September on the, or rather, January on the Kickstarter. But is that the release date you'd be shooting for the PDF, or would you be shooting for something a bit later?
The PDFs we're actually shooting for earlier than that, mainly because our approach has always been one filled with humility. We don't know what you guys want so much as you guys know. So we'll do our best to put something out, but it's with rigorous feedback and playtesting that we'll be able to iron out all the wrinkles and deliver the most polished experience to people as we can. We've done a lot of playtesting with this particular product already, simply because this is one that includes professional mods. We've had to get put in the hands of psychotherapists, occupational therapists, like literacy professionals, and so on and so forth. But none of that is ultimately a substitute for just the average player that's looking to enjoy their time playing this. So, yeah, the PDFs will be dropping earlier than that to backers. We'll get a chance to see how people feel about everything, update stuff, and then take it to production. Where the physical copies, assuming everything goes well, and fingers crossed, 'cause it's always unknown with Kickstarters, but the physical copies are looking for probably a January release. If we somehow magically didn't create a bunch of problems with the content that we need to update through all the playtesting that we see, we might be able to do a bit earlier and do like a let's say around Christmas delivery. Can't
Mhm.
promise that, but that'd be ideal.
Yeah, I could see the possibility of that, as well as well as potentially using that to um, do either the endless box or making somebody lose Whamageddon. That's always fun.
Yeah, the our thinking has, or at least our release timing also has a little bit of planning around the next major Emberwind drop. I can't say much more than that at the moment, but we're very very cognitive of other dates right now because we're spinning up something cool in the background of all this too.
Mhm. I can certainly get that, and I will look forward to seeing how it develops. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank both of you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Yeah, it's been great to be on here.
Uh, and anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Well, I mean, if you're buying, always happy. Just no Budweiser, please.
Oh, of course not.
Hashtag
No,
not sponsored.
nobody's sponsoring me. Oh, And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.